Over the past year, PragerU has been officially accepted into public schools in 7 states, and they just recently launched their financial literacy class in New Hampshire, which students can take to receive actual credit required to graduate. This is kind of wild when you think about it, because as I've talked about in past videos, their academic content is not good. So what I wanted to do for this video was to take this financial literacy course, look into some of their other new academic offerings, and make a fun little video dunking on how bad they are. Because don't get me wrong, this class is bad. It is literally just 75 minutes worth of videos and then a couple of quizzes. It's basically 3 Dennis Prager monologues in a trench coat masquerading as something of actual academic value. But while I was looking deeper into it, trying to figure out how it got accepted into New Hampshire schools in the first place, I discovered a rabbit hole. So let's talk about this terrible financial literacy course, the clandestine deals that got it into New Hampshire schools, and what it means for the future of PragerU. Let's get into it, shall we? But first, we need to ask, with groups like PragerU becoming ever more mainstream, how can we know who to trust? While there's no such thing as an entirely unbiased news source, there are ways to figure out what kind of biases a source might have so you can become a more critical reader. That's why I use Ground News, the sponsor of today's video. Ground News is a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer who wanted news to be more data-driven and objective. Here's how it works. You look up a topic or article, and then Ground News searches over 50,000 news outlets from all different political angles, and then uses information from 3 different news monitoring organizations to give a visual breakdown of information, like what the source's biases are, how accurate it is, and who owns it. I recently ran across a story about how a Virginia school board voted to restore the Confederate names to 2 schools. And when you find a story like this, Ground News gives you a ton of information. Like in the coverage details section, they tell you how many articles have been published about the story, 84 in this case, as well as the breakdown of the political bias of each of those sources. Visually, we can see in the bias distribution chart that 33% lean left, 25% lean right, and 42% are in the middle. You can also see how many of the articles are from highly factual publications, 62% of the articles here, as well as who owns the various publications, like how 15% of the sources here are from independent news organizations. When you look through all the articles, you can sort them by their bias, recency, or factuality, and you can even hide paywalled sources, which I find really helpful. One of the most interesting things about this, though, is being able to compare how different sides frame the same story. Like, for this story, so many of the right-leaning news sources refer to the decisions as being part of some larger wave, a broader trend, or a movement to return Confederate-linked names to schools. And they frame the decision as a restoration, as going back to how things should be. I also especially loved this one. Uncancelled. Virginia School Board votes to rename 2 schools after historic Confederate leaders 4 years after they were changed. It's exceptionally silly. But on the other hand, many of the left-leaning sources focused on how the original decisions were made in light of the 2020 George Floyd Black Lives Matter protests. Being able to easily compare the different sides of a story can help you more clearly identify biases and the kind of inflammatory language that's being used to influence you. But something else that's really useful is their blind spot feature, which is fully unlocked with the Vantage plan. It highlights stories that are disproportionately covered by only one side of the political spectrum. I know that I often get stuck in my own little internet bubble, so it's good to see stories that you may not otherwise, like this story about a new nature documentary series on gay and trans animals, which has only been covered by right-leaning sources, but because of this blind spot feature, I now have a new super cute show to watch. Ground News just makes it so much easier to spot the biases that permeate all of our news and become a more critical consumer of media. Now that I've been using Ground News, I feel a lot more confident because I know where my news is coming from, what kinds of biases it might have, and what kinds of alternate perspectives I might need. So if you want to read the news with a little bit more of a critical eye, then head on over to ground.news/ZoeB and subscribe for 40% off unlimited access this month with the Vantage subscription. Again, that link is ground.news/ZoeB, or you can use the QR code on screen. And thank you again to Ground News for sponsoring. But with that, let's get back to the video. So let's talk about this financial literacy class. This class was not very good. Like I mentioned, it consists of 15 5-minute videos from PragerU's Cash Course show, which have been divided up into 4 modules, each with its own 10-question assessment at the end, culminating in a final 40-question assessment, a 90% score on which will allow you to receive this, a certificate of completion, which you can then use to receive actual academic credit to fulfill your high school graduation requirement in New Hampshire. From a pedagogical point of view, this class structure isn't exactly rigorous, but it's also not uncommon for online courses. And if you've seen my other video on PragerU's lesson plans, then this probably all feels kind of familiar too. Watch a video and then answer some questions is PragerU's MO. The videos are fine. They're all very obviously for children. They have that sickeningly saccharine pop energy of kids' television, but they're well produced and competently written. Some of the little visual gags are genuinely kind of cute, but overall, they're just fine. And the questions are also just fine. There were a couple that were confusingly written, but for the most part, they're nothing to write home about. Genuinely, the worst part of all of this is that it's so lazily made and doesn't really have any academic value. Students could so easily just ignore the videos and then Google the questions to get the answers. I don't think that anyone is going to learn anything from this course. At the end of the day, this class is really just inoffensive. It's not bad enough to be funny, and it's not bigoted enough to warrant massive backlash. It's just meh. But then you have to ask, how did something this aggressively mid get approved? Well, that is a great question. In 2018, New Hampshire created their Learn Everywhere program, which essentially allows students to get credit for their extracurricular activities. Like, for instance, if you were on a recreational soccer team, you could get your phys ed credit, or if you took piano lessons, you could get your music credit. But the organizations running these activities have to be approved by the New Hampshire State Board of Education to be able to actually grant students certificates of credit for those activities. Once an organization's program has been approved by the board, students don't need permission from the school to enroll in a Learn Everywhere program. If a program has been approved, you can just do it and then get your certificate exchanged for academic credit, no questions asked. On one hand, this is fine. I think it's cool that you can get credit for the activities that you would be engaging in anyway, but I also think that there's a lot of potential problems. For instance, while it's a good thing that the Learn Everywhere programs don't use any state funding, so they're not taking money from schools or being financially supported by taxpayers, that does mean that they have to be paid for by parents, which injects more economic inequality into public education. Also, in their FAQ, this program is just explicitly said to be based on how charter schools work, so that's not a good sign. But the exciting thing you might notice about this idea of students getting credit for anything is that it's vague as hell. And honestly, while I was looking into the requirements for who could apply for this program, it didn't really seem like there were any real limits. You just have to say what program or subject your organization will provide credit for, and then describe how you will evaluate students. And that's pretty much it as far as actual educational requirements go. It's honestly a little concerning. But the good news is that for these classes to be accepted into the Learn Everywhere program, they have to go through a whole gauntlet of evaluations and discussion and voting before they are ever actually put in front of any students. And luckily, thanks to the investigative reporting of Sarah Gibson for New Hampshire Public Radio, we know exactly how PragerU got through this particular bureaucratic gauntlet. Now, I know bureaucracy is super boring, but I promise this gets interesting, so just bear with me. So, PragerU submitted its application on June 28, 2023, and then a 2-person approval committee was formed. As part of the review process, the committee also reached out to New Hampshire teachers and other experts to look at the application, but interestingly, neither the teachers nor the Elon members responded to the offer to review the application. But the lack of reasonable availability of these members of the committee to participate in the review of the application did not preclude the completion of the review process. So, without the feedback of teachers, the committee reviewed the application and on July 10th submitted their feedback to PragerU. This feedback included some issues the reviewers took with the assessments, just the assessments, Those were the only comments the reviewers had. But based on those comments, PragerU was given the opportunity to submit another application, which they did. And on July 24th, their revised application was sent to Frank Edelblut, the Education Commissioner of New Hampshire, who reviewed the application and sent his recommendation to the State Board of Education to approve PragerU's application. Soon after, on August 10th, the Board of Ed had a meeting to discuss whether to finally officially accept PragerU as part of the Learn Everywhere program. But these meetings are public, and the public had some thoughts. Several people attended the meeting and shared their opinions on PragerU, and the Board of Education decided to table the application until later because of all of the concerns. Then, the next month, on September 14th, the board unanimously voted to approve PragerU's Cash Course as part of the Learn Everywhere program, and the rest is history. Or financial literacy, I guess. So let's recap. At the end of June, PragerU submitted an application to be accepted into the Learn Everywhere program, and after a single round of very light revisions, a two-person committee decided that the course was good enough to be submitted for acceptance. Then, in July, Commissioner Edelblut gave the application his stamp of approval and sent it off to the Board of Education. In August, the board listened to the public's outcry against PragerU, and then in September, they approved the application anyway. So, what happened? It seems kind of weird that such a controversial applicant would be approved with such relatively little oversight, right? Well, there is a tiny bit of context that I left out of the story. Like I mentioned earlier, there were only 2 committee members who reviewed the whole thing, which is the absolute bare minimum for what's allowed under New Hampshire state law. But these committee members are supposed to reach out to other educators to get further guidance on whether the applicant should be approved or not. Well, they reached out, and no one responded. And that's kind of odd, right? After all, it's PragerU. Everyone has strong feelings about PragerU. Well, as it turns out, the teachers they reached out to were given a total of 4 days to read through the application, look through PragerU's website, evaluate all the offerings, and then write up their findings. Oh, and not only was it only 4 days, it was also 4 days over a holiday. In fact, during the public board meeting in August, the president of the American Federation of Teachers New Hampshire said that being asked to review the content of the videos between July 3rd and July 7th when teachers are on vacation is an insulting ask of professionals. Other critics agreed and even suggested that PragerU's application should be withdrawn until teachers have a fair chance to respond. It almost feels like the teachers were set up to fail, doesn't it? Well, then you'll be glad to know that even though the teachers were given hardly any time to share their thoughts on PragerU, PragerU itself was given plenty of time to defend themselves against the public outcry that the Board of Education had received. Their CEO, Marissa Streit, actually sent a whole letter to the BOE in September before that second board meeting, breaking down all the claims people made about them and addressing all the complaints. There are actually some great lines in here, like, "Our lesson plans are non-political." Okay. And regarding the absurd claims that PragerU is a racist, homophobic, and anti-science organization, these claims are simply untrue. They're made by the true extremists, those who are more interested in turning our children into social justice warriors than in teaching them basic concepts of Judeo-Christian morality. Or, my favorite, our Cash Course certificate program is a well-crafted, high-quality educational platform perfectly suited for the Learn Everywhere program. Is it, Marissa? Is it really? But even after PragerU defended themselves so well, people were still mad. And at the final board meeting in September, the meeting minutes included over 100 pages of emails sent from students, parents, teachers, representatives, and other community members all across New Hampshire, sharing their concerns about allowing PragerU into public schools in the state. Some of the emails were explicitly about PragerU's political leanings, with many writing about how approving financial literacy materials from this organization lends credibility to its materials as a whole, while others just expressed concern over the lack of academic rigor in the course itself. Like I talked about in my video about PragerU's lesson plans, even if you pushed all the politics to the side, PragerU's educational work would still suck. And lots of people writing to the Board of Education, even people who otherwise liked PragerU, felt the same way. Mark McLean, executive director of the New Hampshire School Administrators Association and former business computer economics teacher, stated the content was good, but does not believe that it is enough to provide students what they need for any sort of comprehensive financial literacy program. Assessment is supposed to be meaningful, varied, and authentic. 40 multiple-choice questions don't meet those criteria. It's not asking kids to analyze anything, synthesize information, put things together to draw hypotheses. They're just regurgitating information they watched on a video. And sure, there were some emails in support of the course, but a big chunk of those were just in support of any financial literacy course, not necessarily PragerU's specifically. Just because some people don't like the source does not mean that the courses don't have merit. Kids today should learn how to manage their finances for their own success. Surely it would provide some practical information that would benefit students as they begin to take on financial responsibilities. Anything that makes high school students smarter about their money will be helpful. Clearly, these videos will not make anyone a CPA, but they will help young people to keep their checkbooks balanced. And then, of course, there's my favorite email from good old Deb. I support the PragerU financial literacy course. The Comic Sans really just, makes it. Now, you might be asking, without the support of any teachers, and with all of this public backlash, how did this course get approved? Well, let's take a second to talk about Education Commissioner Frank Edelblue. During all of the back and forth with the public, Edelblue was always on the side of PragerU. Like, he always had some kind of rebuttal for anyone's concern about the program. It seems like he's a huge fan of PragerU, which would make sense given that he spoke at one of their events, which he received compensation for, before the course was approved in New Hampshire schools. To quote New Hampshire Public Radio, according to public records obtained by NHPR, as the PragerU Learn Everywhere application was pending, Edelblue spoke to PragerU donors at an event in California, received lodging paid for by PragerU, and agreed to record interviews for PragerU's marketing campaign. Now, you might think this sounds super sketchy. Because it is. And just to be clear, I'm not saying he did anything illegal. He probably didn't. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. But at the very least, there's some ethically iffy, eyebrow-raising stuff going on, right? The NHPR article goes on to describe exactly what Edelblue was compensated for. PragerU staff emailed Edelblue in July asking if he would participate in an ad featuring state education commissioners about bringing PragerU to students, and speak about Learn Everywhere with PragerU donors at a virtual town hall. Though PragerU's application before the State Board of Education had not been approved, Edelblue agreed to participate in both. He wrote in an email that once PragerU's financial literacy course was approved in New Hampshire, I'm looking forward to pushing out that offering considerably. He personally wanted to shill for this specific program. When people became aware of this, they got understandably upset, but were assured that Edelblue's appearance at a PragerU donor event was just an opportunity to promote New Hampshire's own education initiatives, and Edelblue said his relationship with PragerU was unrelated to whether or not the group got state approval. Sure. Okay, so it's just a coincidence that he approved the course at the same time that they paid for him to come down to do a whole press event for them. Sure. Okay. Whatever you say. Now, there are rules about disclosing these kinds of relationships, especially when money is involved, but according to official records, Edelblue's trip wasn't reported until several days after NHPR started looking into things. And that would be bad enough, but it's not like the Board of Education members who were voting on whether to accept PragerU's application were completely impartial either. For instance, there's State Board Chairman Andrew Klein, who, according to a Rolling Stone report, also serves as president of the Josiah Bartlett Center, a conservative free market think tank. Isn't that just interesting? Now, again, I don't know that there's anything actively uncouth happening here. I just think there's a lot of extra context that can be added to an otherwise straightforward story of how the PragerU class got adopted in New Hampshire. Because it wasn't straightforward. It was fought against the whole way, and yet, because of the relatively lax approval process paired with the suspicious treatment of the teachers who could have advised against adopting the course, and the fact that both the board chairman and the education commissioner had relationships with right-wing think tanks in general, and even PragerU specifically, we've now ended up with an unpopular organization peddling its inferior product in public schools in New Hampshire. So, what is to be learned from all this? Like, what was the point of me making yet another PragerU video? Well, many of the conclusions that I've drawn here just reaffirm a lot of what I've said in the past. Like I said in an earlier video, it is exceedingly obvious that PragerU just doesn't care about education. What they care about is their brand. Everything they do is incredibly lazy in their lesson plans, in their financial literacy class, and even in their Econ 101 class that I took. Well, I say class. So I received an email from them advertising an Economics 101 course, and I thought, oh, perfect, I can do this at the same time as their financial literacy class, and it'll be great, awesome. And so I signed up for it, and it's just a series of emails. It's just a series of emails, just emails, one every day, which each contain a single 5-minute video. And not even a new 5-minute video, one of their old 5-minute videos from the past several years, but it gets worse. As part of the class, you also get access to their Econ 101 textbook, as well as a book from their partners at the Atlas Society, so you'd think that's something, right? No, their Econ 101 textbook is literally just a compilation of the transcripts of the videos they sent you, illustrated with AI-generated art in the most boring style imaginable. So you're just getting 2 separate versions of the same years-old 5-minute videos, and they have the audacity to call it a class. Even the book from the Atlas Society is just a 46-page pocket guide to socialism, written by a group founded on Ayn Rand's philosophy, who believe that ethical self-interest should be the backbone of society. Every single thing about this whole organization is just so lazy. But don't get me wrong, just because they're lazy doesn't mean they're not dangerous. They are. First of all, they might not be putting outright bigotry or explicitly right-wing talking points in their financial literacy lessons, but many of those things are implied or just baked into the underlying assumptions of their kids' content. For instance, their video about taxes is supposed to teach kids about the pros and cons of taxes, but the pros are just glazed over, and every character in the video actively complains about paying taxes and whines about them the whole time.
In this world, nothing can be said to be certain, except death and...
No.
Don't say it. Please don't say it. Please don't say it.
taxes.
You said it. Okay, I get it. Taxes are everywhere. But is there a way to reduce the taxes I pay?
Fortunately,
Why is that the question? Why is it not, oh, what do I get for my taxes? What is the benefit of taxes? Like, the framing of this is just so frustrating. I am so frustrated. Kids who watch this are going to get the impression that taxes are the worst thing in the world and do no good for anyone. There's also the oversimplification of bigger issues like poverty. They have a whole video dedicated to budgeting, and they suggest that you can just budget your way out of being poor, and that being poor just comes down to personal choices rather than larger issues, but that's just not how that works. There's also no questioning of things. Like, maybe this is too much to ask from PragerU, but for instance, when they talk about banks being for-profit, or the existence of overdraft fees, or the idea that debt is good actually, they just accept that that's how things are and don't provide any room to question whether things should be that way. Because that would require critical thinking skills, and PragerU isn't here to promote critical thinking, they're here to promote their brand. But most concerning to me, at least, is their most nefarious, subtle propaganda. The series of videos in their craftery show, which are all about making military-inspired crafts. They have catapult cannons, paper fighter jets, and an Iron Dome defender. And this is what they argue is non-political. Amazing. Free Palestine. Anyway, this is not to say that this is all unexpected or anything. I wasn't expecting PragerU's classes to be rigorous inquiry-based explorations of systemic issues. It's just that their work is so blatantly biased, and yet they keep getting accepted into schools like the stuff they're saying is normal and fine. But it isn't. To quote that Rolling Stone article from earlier, the Board of Education hearing in New Hampshire and the events leading up to it are still emblematic of PragerU's expansion strategy. The organization has sought rubber stamps by courting members of conservative administrations who in turn work to push through approvals. Any authorization, however minimal, is then marketed as a sweeping endorsement of their content and mission, boosting their credibility. And some people argue that this endorsement isn't dangerous because PragerU isn't making money from these partnerships. And sure, they aren't, that's true, but you know what's more powerful than money? Influence. PragerU is ramping up their initiatives with politicians in order to spread their brand through those politicians' constituency, and politicians are then using PragerU as a launchpad. Both of these groups are giving each other legitimacy. PragerU gets taken more seriously because they're collaborating with politicians, and politicians get to spread their messages on a massive platform. It's a win-win. And it's dangerous. And they're not going to stop. For now, PragerU Kids approved material in New Hampshire is limited to a free financial literacy program called Cash Course. But in an email to the Department of Education, the head of education at PragerU Kids expressed enthusiasm about the course's growth, saying they plan to build similar programs for civics, history, economics, and more. If they are given the space, they will just keep growing. While I was making this video, news broke that PragerU had just been accepted into schools in Louisiana. And not just their kids' content either, but even some of their 5-minute videos. They have a whole document outlining all the videos that can be used as part of the curriculum, which is 96 pages long. And they're also going to be a part of the state's Freedom Week, where teachers are given special resources chosen and approved by the state. PragerU's materials aren't just free options anymore, they are being explicitly pushed by the state. You know, if I had a nickel for every time PragerU announced that another state was added to its education roster while I was making a video about their education initiatives, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird it happened twice. Anyway, PragerU is now in yet another state, and we need to take that seriously. As I've talked about before, at best, PragerU has nothing of value to offer. And at worst, they're actively dangerous to students. Because they don't care about students, they care about money and power. They've just found that education is their best path for accumulating money and power. If we want to save our schools from PragerU's influence, we need to be cognizant of the problematic beliefs baked into their content and be critical of their relationships with politicians. We need more journalists like Sarah Gibson of New Hampshire Public Radio. We need more critics speaking out about the problems with PragerU. And we need voters to oust public servants who exploit their relationship with PragerU to prop themselves up. We deserve better. Thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. I know this one was a little different from my usual stuff, but I hope that you like it. I want to give a big thank you to my patrons and members whose names are scrolling here beside me. Probably over here. I don't know, I'm trying a new setup, we'll see. As well as an extra special thank you to Hugh Sophia, Jared S., Justin Lowry, Megan Lowndes, and Shep Alderson. I truly would not be able to do this without your support. If you would like to join these folks in the credit, as well as get early and ad-free access to my videos, then you can join my Patreon at patreon.com/Zoe_B or become a channel member using the link below. And finally, we have our patron poem of the video for Ella Bean. Here is Forget Me Not. Let me be your damp woods on some dawn in early July, where the air is so thick you can hear it, and lichen white bark turns the oak trees blue. Let me be that brief sweet moment before the promise of afternoon sun, where the grass crunches yellow and sweat-soaked linen sticks to your skin. Then let my morning mist burn away in the cradle of maple and pine, when the day breaks like a fever, and you forget the feel of dew. And until next time, stay safe, stay warm, and I will see y'all again soon, I hope. Bye, folks. Do you like my mug? It has eyeballs on it. This was a birthday gift last year, I think, from my sister. So shout out to Zoe's sister in the comments if you get to this part in the video, because look at this mug. Look how cool this is. Everybody needs an eyeball mug. That's my hot take. Eyeball mug. Best mug. This is just the best mug. I love the mug. Mug is good. Good mug. Good mug.